Hi, everyone. We're the LI-brarians, and we're here today to talk about our project for the 2020 NYLA Developing Leaders Program, Pathways to Inclusivity. I'm Michael Fitzpatrick, IT librarian and building manager at the Glen Cove Public Library.
I am Lucetti Thomas Johnson, and I am the Spanish outreach librarian slash bilingual school library liaison at the Patchogue Medford Library.
And I'm Rosanna Costa, Program Coordinator of the Hicksville Public Library.
And I'm Liz Hughes, one of the children's librarians at the Half Hollow Hills Community Library. We will be presenting our toolkit we created in order to discuss the pathways libraries can take to achieve inclusivity within their communities.
We will provide examples of programming efforts, outreach efforts, collection development policies, and general building design ideas which can be utilized in libraries no matter their location.
Our goal is to give you the means to promote a welcoming and inclusive environment to each and every patron for your libraries.
In the early stages of the Developing Leaders program, we were kicking around ideas for our capstone project when we were galvanized by Mark Puente's presentation on equity, diversity, and inclusion at our meeting in NYLA's headquarters. Each team member was intrigued by where the concept could lead us within the context of our individual job responsibilities. We realized then, if we looked at inclusivity through the four facets of the library's physical space, its collection development, its outreach efforts, and its programming, a holistic approach to the challenges of inclusivity emerged. So let's discuss these pathways to inclusivity. I'm going to start us off with a brief discussion of the library's physical space. Regardless of any other initiatives the library undertakes, its physical space needs to make the entire community feel welcome. The Americans with Disabilities Act, passed in 1990 and updated in 2010, sets statutory requirements for public access, but it's just a starting point toward making your facility inclusive. There are a set of basic issues that need to be considered in the context of inclusivity. These include ingress and egress. Your facility is required to have handicapped accessible features such as ramps, automatic doors, and handicapped parking spaces. These spaces should ideally be as near as possible to the entrances and exits. Freedom of movement. The library's aisles and stacks need room for wheelchair users to navigate and turn. Public areas and seating areas need to be wheelchair accessible as well. Level-to-level accessibility. In multi-level facilities, where elevators are not possible or are cost prohibitive, lifts can be used to grant access to separate levels. Accessible transaction spaces. Reference and information desks should be low enough for anyone to approach comfortably, while circulation desks should be multi-level to accommodate standing patrons, as well as children and those in wheelchairs. Lighting. While it's great to incorporate natural light into a space, large windows should have blinds or shades to control the light and heat that enters the space. It's optimal to have multiple lighting zones to allow for greater control of lighting in different areas, preferably controlled by dimmer switches. Signage. Signage should be clear and highly visible, and when possible, should make use of braille and pictograms. As an example, the sign on the right can be universally understood. Quiet space. We all know libraries are no longer the stereotypical silent places of the past. They're more of a bustling community center. However, there are some people who, for various reasons, need quiet space within the building, and it's important these spaces be provided. Assistive technologies. Examples of technologies to assist the sight and hearing impaired include digital magnifiers for both print and electronic reading, and hearing loop or induction loop systems, which allow transmission of sound directly to hearing aids. Staff areas. The facility needs to be welcoming, not just to the public, but must also take into account possible accommodations staff members may require. This includes spaces like back offices, break areas, and restrooms. It's important to incorporate universal design. Universal design is the design and composition of an environment so that it can be used to the greatest extent possible by all people, regardless of their age, size, ability, or disability. Simply put, universal design is good design. There are 7 principles of universal design. 1 is equitable use. 2, flexibility in use. 3, simple and intuitive use. 4, perceptible information. 5, tolerance for error. 6, low physical effort. 7, size and space for approach and use. Keeping current is vital. Facilities must be continually reevaluated by various stakeholders using the principles of universal design. Most importantly, consider setting up a committee or a panel, including library management, library staff, library users, and representatives of local advocacy groups when possible. It should meet on a regular basis. A process should be set up to receive and consider library user input in an ongoing manner. Finally, library policies should be put in place to ensure that universal design principles are considered when planning for any new library initiatives. At this point, I'll turn it over to Liz, who'll talk about collection development.
Once you've looked at the physical space of your building, it's then important to look at the collection housed within it. Librarians have a professional responsibility to be inclusive in collection development and in the provision of interlibrary loan. This includes content that reflects a diversity of issues, whether they be, for example, political, economic, religious, social, ethnic, or sexual. A balanced collection reflects a diversity of content, not an equality of numbers. This quote comes from the Diversity in Collection Development and Interpretation of the Library Bill of Rights, and I feel it is a great jumping off point for librarians no matter what institution you work for. Use it to think about what it means to create an inclusive collection for the community or population your library serves. Are you a public library that serves a broad spectrum of patrons that walk in your doors daily? Are you an academic library which serves a diverse student population? Are you a specialized library that functions for a specific organization, for example, a law or medical library? All of the above institutions, as well as some I'm sure I've forgotten, can benefit from the idea of looking at what it means to be an inclusive collection. So let's take a look and address some of the key ideas needed to consider what an inclusive collection looks like. The first thing that usually comes to mind when a library professional mentions collection development is the physical materials housed within a library's buildings. It's the books, movies, video games, periodicals, etc. that are readily available to the population that a library is serving. It's ensuring that no matter who walks in our building, there is something there for them to pick up, check out, and ensure they are getting the information they need at any given time. Our job as librarians is to ensure that the materials contained in our collections, both physical and digital, reflect and anticipate those needs. The best way to think about your collection is to look at it as if you're putting together a puzzle. Our building is the physical frame and our community is the pieces we need to make the project whole and complete. And while this is all good and well to imagine what a perfect collection would look like, it's just that, an imagination. There are numerous challenges library professionals face when creating a collection which need to be addressed. One common issue is space. Having a giant collection is great, but where can you possibly store all of the items you need and want in your collection? Framework to use when thinking about the space needed for your collection can be based upon, do you need to provide an actual item, or can you just provide access to them? I.e., do you need a physical book on your shelf, or is a digital book available online good enough? Do I need to have these items available in my library, or can I loan it from somewhere else? Another thing to think about with space is, what are the best format or formats for this item in my collection? Is it good enough to just have the book? Do I need to have it in large print? Do I need to have an audiobook? Do I need to have it in Braille? That kind of stuff are things to think about because each of those items will take up space on your shelf. And that leads into the last one is my collection available in a diverse amount of formats? This can also include books that are written in other languages. Another challenge that we face when it comes to collection development is time. If your sole role in an institution is collection development, then this may be a non-factor for you. But for the rest of librarians or the library staff curating content for our collection, time is sometimes a big factor in finding materials. And while there are professional journals with fantastic reviews of materials being produced, finding and reading and sorting through these sources is sometimes time-consuming and more often than not placed on the back burner of a librarian's to-do list. More often, librarians are ordering materials using sources such as Amazon or other purchasing sites to find out what's popular and to choose to purchase from there because they know there is a need for it in their community, While this may be a great way to build a collection, there's a cost that comes with using this as your only method of purchasing materials. It's easy to overlook and hurt the likelihood of finding books which are outside of the mainstream. And the last challenge we encounter with collection development is the actual policy surrounding collection development. After this presentation, I challenge each and every one of you to go look at the collection development policy for your institution. Notice, do you even have a collection development policy? Does your policy contain procedures such as ordering books solely based on professional reviews? Is your policy broad and contain no real guidance on how to curate and defend your collection? Does the language in your collection development policy undermine the critical need for an inclusive collection? All of this is important because while a policy may look like it's inclusive, it doesn't mean that it is. For example, while there is nothing wrong with calling for materials to be professionally reviewed, it is important to define what that actually means within your institution. We live in a digital age where there is a broad range of sources and outlets, for example, blogs, which are contrary to the traditional review sources we are used to looking at. These digital review sources are often overlooked and can create a bias toward traditional publishing houses, which have the means to get their titles reviewed in what is deemed professional. Does your institution accept those blogs and digital resources from reputable writers as a professional source? This is all food for thought because it is a huge deciding factor when it comes to creating and maintaining a collection development policy. So after you've put all that thought into your collection, its policy, and figuring out how you will provide, it's time to create and maintain it. The first suggestion I have for you guys in creating and maintaining an inclusive collection is creating a community analysis. You guys know better than anyone else who walks in your door. Feel free to ask them if they found what they're looking for when they check out, and take note of what is missing if the answer is no. Another idea is to hand out surveys and entice patrons to return them with the idea of a raffle or contest of some sort. Another thing I want you guys to do is check your shelves. Is there a wide variety of fiction and nonfiction books depicting people and subjects from all walks of life? Are these books circulating? If they're not, if it looks like there's some dust on them, can you make a display to showcase the diversity collection you have if these titles aren't going out? Like I said before, this list can go on, but the helpfulness of it will also rely on the resources and means that are available to you at your institution. Our goal is to make sure that our collection meets the exact needs of every library user, and while a collection is important to everyone that walks through the doors, the outreach you provide is just as important. So I'm going to turn this over to Lizetti, who will talk to us about the importance of that.
Okay, so you have excellent programs, collections, and services inside of your beautiful buildings, but you see the same handful of people coming into your programs week after week. While we love our diehard fans, we know we have to get new people in, right? Or you might have another issue, which is that you might have wonderful programs that are educational, enlightening, and entertaining, but nobody comes to them. So even if your programs are excellent and timely, do they really fit in with what your community wants and needs from you right now? So that's like something you have to ask yourself. What must happen so that the quality of programs and services improve? Outreach. Say it out loud for the people in the back. Outreach is not about letting your community know what services and programs you have. It's more about meeting the patrons you serve and learning more about them and what they need and want from you. It's also about relationship building. You have to build relationships with local organizations to meet the common goal of serving your patrons or serving your community. So where do you start? So you have to start by pinpointing your demographic. Look at your census and state school reports to find out who lives in your community. And you also need to take a deep look into who lives there but isn't being represented. So where do you find the people? People usually go to community events such as local parades, firehouse events, chamber events, fairs, farmers markets, school events, definitely. If they have kids, they're going to be at those events, and local preschool and business events. So wherever the community goes, you go. Who to build relationships with aside from your patrons? So we also have to build relationships with other organizations to make sure that we meet patron needs. Seek out partners whose goals align with yours. Usually the goal is to serve a specific need. Schools, not-for-profit organizations, local government, police, businesses. If they're all in your community and they're all trying to serve that community, you all have one common goal right there. Relationship building. So To start building relationships with different organizations, you should start with your top level person. Go to that person and you see if they can work with you. And sometimes they can't, they're busy. So if they can't work with you directly, they'll be able to point you in the direction of somebody who can. That is a great thing right there. So, and while you want to find that common goal in the beginning, sometimes it takes a little bit to kind of develop. You also might end up doing more of that work, which is okay. You have to start, especially if you're just starting to build these relationships, you have to be accommodating. You might even end up doing most of the work, but the building of the relationship is the most beneficial part of it. So it's okay to do that. And in the future, you might be called upon for future projects, or you might be called upon to come to an event. So that's okay. Sometimes you need to check in and follow up. So you have to make those calls, those emails. Sometimes a visit is okay. They're not too busy, because the truth is that people are busy and sometimes they get involved in doing other things, and that comes first. And you kind of just have to get back to them and remind them. That way you can get things done in a timely fashion. This is also a great opportunity. When you check in, is a great opportunity for you to kind of figure out what you've already done. And if what you've already done is working toward meeting those goals that you set in the beginning of the project, that is great. And then if they're not, you have to kind of reevaluate at that point. So this is a perfect chance to do that. There are some challenges with outreach. You're definitely going to come across some things. Some of the challenges are staffing or lack thereof. It's hard to send people out to events, galas, things like that, if you don't have the people in your building. So you definitely have to realize that this is a time-consuming endeavor, so you have to be able to put in that time. Staff training is very, very important. You need to make sure that you're sending the right staff to the right type of events. You definitely don't want to send someone who's shy out to an event where they have to be super outgoing and kind of be the face of everything. Getting invited to these events. Sometimes getting invited is difficult, because if they don't know you're there and that you have an interest, they're definitely not going to invite you. So sometimes you have to kind of push your way in and let them know that you're there and that you're interested. And then you'll start getting invitations. And then when you do start getting invitations, you need to be able to choose the events that you're going to attend, and you need to choose which ones are going to be more meaningful for you, for your project, for your community, for you to be there for. And this is very important, especially with the first thing that I mentioned, which was staffing. So when you're dealing with more than one invitation, this is where you can kind of figure out where you can spare that staff. And you have to know that relationship building does not happen overnight. This is something that you have to work toward. This is something that you have to work at. So you have to be able to put in the time. And measuring success. So how do you know when you've made it or when you're doing it the right way? The easiest way to know that you're doing it the right way is when you're not the person making those calls, sending those emails, begging for an invitation anymore. When the local organizations are the ones calling you and asking you to be a partner in their next project or coming over to have a table at their event, you know that you're doing the right things. Another way of measuring success is definitely by seeing it in your building. When you're seeing those new faces coming into your programs, using your resources, you know that your outreach is really making its way there, and people know more about your library, your services, your collections, and all of those great things that you've had to begin with, and they just didn't know. Thank you so much for listening to the outreach portion, and now I'm going to pass it over to Roseanne, who will be talking about inclusivity in programming.
The library is an equalizer in the community, and its programming should lend itself to the mission of equitable access and inclusivity. There are 5 main steps in programming. First, consider the needs of the community and utilize some of the research techniques Lizette had mentioned. Then in your planning stage, you'll select topics and begin to develop details like space, whether your event is in the library or out in the community or virtual, and budgeting and staffing. Then you'll develop a marketing campaign. Think inclusive while designing graphics and using various promotional avenues. Consider translating flyers, using videos with closed captioning as promotional tools, and focusing on outreach. You also want to use inclusive wording throughout the campaign. On the day of the event, you'll need to be on hand to make sure everyone is welcome and comfortable. Finally, Using surveys as an evaluation tool is incredibly important to continually improve your programming. Don't forget to always think inclusive in each step of this process. Inclusivity does not mean singling anyone out, but rather integrating everyone. Creating a welcoming environment begins when you walk in the door. There should be programs for staff in topics such as customer service, sensitivity to correct terminology and actions, for example, asking before helping, assistive technologies, and knowledge of resources and collections relating to the events. We can do this by providing internal workshops as well as sending staff to external workshops and conferences. You should be familiar with groups that you might not be reaching and are considered to be underrepresented or have barriers to access. These groups include people with sensory issues, physical disabilities, communication barriers such as literacy and language, those in economic distress, and also factors like age, race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, religious background, and culture that all come into play when we talk about diversity and inclusion. We can separate programs into two groups, targeted and inclusive. Targeted programs are geared towards a specific group. They should fall under the umbrella of inclusivity and be available to all. Inclusive programs adapt and modify elements to include a diverse group of people. Both types have their place in the library. Inclusivity involves the assistive technologies and adaptive equipment and furniture that Michael had discussed. We also want to adapt and modify elements of the event. This can be achieved through bringing programs out into the community for those with transportation barriers or providing cost-free programs for people who are economically disenfranchised. As an example of inclusive programming, many libraries have cooking programs or refreshments at events. You want to be cognizant of dietary needs and preferences. The presenter should keep these factors in mind and seamlessly incorporate variations into the program so no one feels like they're being singled out. People with sensory issues have an aversion to anything that triggers the senses like light, sound, touch, or smell. Examples of targeted programs include sensory story times, sensory playgroups, and sensory-friendly musical performances and movies. Although these are considered to be targeted programs, they should remain open to all and therefore inclusive. If you want to adapt your current programming to be sensory-friendly, you could purchase multisensory items or use visuals like storyboards. There are many resources available for this type of programming. Representation matters. You want to make sure that you have diversity so attendees feel represented, therefore making the environment more welcoming. If you have a panel discussion, be sure to include a diverse group of people. Conduct programs in multiple languages, run multi-generational and multicultural events. If you have a book discussion or author events, be sure to include literature featuring underrepresented groups and invite authors of various backgrounds. These are just a few examples, but you should look at all of your programming and see how it could be adapted to be inclusive. There are a host of resources that you can find on this slide. When physical space, collection, outreach, and programming converge, we can create a truly inclusive environment.